Turn! Die! Say it some more.
I think he said CARM. Die.
I thought I heard that too. I was like,
you replay that. I think he said CARM as in Matt Slick's ministry. You gotta go back like 15 seconds.
All right. Turn!
Yep. He said CARM.
It's time for another Bible-thumping wingnut Google Hangout and podcast with Matt Slick from CARM.org. And now, here's your host, Andrew Rappaport.
You still love that one, don't you, Matt?
It's kind of interesting. I think he says, instead of CARM, I think it might have been saying burn.
Well, he does say burn afterwards, but we have no idea what he was trying to say. But the funny thing is everyone was glad whatever he said.
Yeah, it was interesting, though. Yeah, you never know what he really said, but yeah, it was fun.
Well, welcome to Slick Answers with Matt Slick. He is going to give answers tonight. Matt,
hopefully.
No is a good answer, isn't it? When we don't know an answer to something?
I don't know a lot of stuff, so we'll see what happens tonight.
Had someone this week that said that I don't know is not an answer.
It isn't?
I sounds like one.
I didn't know that was not an answer.
Yeah. So this is a regular hangout we do every Sunday night, 8:00 Eastern time. And we have Matt Slick come in. There is a link, if you're watching on YouTube, there is a link in the description of the hangout that you can join the discussion. Another place you can find the link every week is on CARM.org, CARM.org. And we usually put those up there. We are working on something for the future where we'll have a permanent link.
Yeah.
Be able to join, and we actually, if we can pull this off, we'll be able to have 100 people in the room. I don't think Matt could get through 100 questions in 2 hours.
Oh, sure. Just yes, no, don't know, yes, no, don't know. Things like that.
So we put this on, and then later this becomes one of many podcasts on the Bible Thumping Wingnut Network. And before we start, Matt, I just want to really quick just play a commercial so people can hear the other podcasts that are on the network.
This podcast is a member of the Bible Thumping Wingnut Network.
All right, welcome everybody to another podcast episode with Semper Reformanda Radio.
Hi, welcome to Theology Gals.
Welcome everyone to the Logical Belief Ministries podcast.
Well, welcome to School of Biblical Hermeneutics.
Welcome everybody to Grappling with Theology.
What is going on, guys? Shine his lights coming at you.
Well, welcome to Slick Answers.
Good evening and welcome to Conversations from the Porch. On Christ's solid rock I stand.
Hello and welcome to Living in the Vine.
This is the Council of Google Plus.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Bible Thumping Wingnut Podcast.
The Bible Thumping Wingnut Network. 12 podcasts, one network. Check them out at BibleThumpingWingnut.com.
You know, Matt, that's actually old already. 12 is too few. I think up to like 14 now.
Oh, praise God, man. Good stuff.
So always adding more on the Bible Thumping Wingnut Network. The newest one actually is one I'm doing, the Rappaport. And we did one this week. You like that name, don't you, of that podcast?
Yeah, it's kind of clever. I thought it was clever when I first heard it. Yeah, it's kind of worn its charm off now, but I think it's okay for you to use.
Cool name like Slick.
I know, you don't. That is a slickest name.
I mean, I guess I could be like you and change my name, right? And call myself Andrew Slick, right? Yeah.
You could call yourself Andrew Slick. That'd be weird. Man, that'd be weird.
And for folks who don't know, that actually is your name. You weren't didn't change it. You didn't put it for radio.
Right.
Your
that's
brother
right. Born with it. That's right. I was born with it, so that's what it is.
Yeah. So we want to talk. I recently talked on my podcast about this incident that happened last weekend, and I'm sure since then we've gotten more information. Actually, some of the stuff that I presented on the Texas shooting, Matt, was, as it happened early, we got more information. I was under the impression initially that this guy who shot the people in the church had his weapons illegally, and they should have been illegal. He should not have been able to legally obtain weapons. But the Navy, I think it was the Navy or Air Force, I forget which one now he was in, they didn't file the paperwork with the FBI. So he actually legally obtained the weapons.
Mm-hmm.
So would more gun control laws stop that?
Nah, I wouldn't. It's the leftists. In fact, before the bodies were cold, some people on the left were already saying more gun control, blaming the NRA or whatever it is. It's just ridiculous. But what would have stopped them? People in the church with guns. They would have stopped them in no time. And so, on a Facebook post, someone actually wrote, what would it take to stop a guy? People carried, it might have been 2 or 3 people instead of 26 or 27. So
I think when this happened, President Trump was over in Japan, and he had an interesting argument when someone was kind of demanding there should be gun control, and he basically implied if there was gun control, maybe the deaths would have been more, because it would have stopped the legal abiding citizen that had a weapon that stopped this guy.
He was an NRA instructor, certified NRA instructor. In fact, the guy who did the shooting was an atheist.
Yeah, which I find interesting, because do you remember when someone went into either a Planned Parenthood or abortion clinic and was holding people hostage?
Yeah.
And the media was very quick to say that what is this guy a Christian? They didn't outright say he was a Christian, but is he a Christian? Is he tied to some pro-life group?
Right. But if it's an atheist, they say nothing.
Nothing. There was not a word about it.
The media is such a bunch of liars. Gosh, media sucks. I have no respect for the media. None. They're liars. They're leftist bigots. They're hypocrites. And we could take the things that Jesus said of the Pharisees. You're your father, the devil. You whitewashed sepulchres. You hypocrites. You're full of dead men's bones. That's the left media, leftist media.
Okay, so you're mentioning the media. Now you make me where I really want to do this. So on my podcast, which I know you don't listen to.
You have a podcast?
We play a game, and it'd be fun to play this with you. Not so much because you'll get the fallacy, but it'll be more fun to see your response. But I'll play the intro music we play for.
All right.
This. Now it's time for Name That Fallacy. Okay, so let us get this up here, Matt, so you'll be able to see. This is on MSNBC shortly afterwards, and I want you to pay attention to the end of this, because I'm curious if you can name which fallacy it is, but I thought that this was more the fallacy of stupiditis or ridiculous itemus. But it's amazing what this guy ends up saying, and this is in the media, you'll really get tweaked by it.
The unifying thread is the sort of broader politics of Donald Trump, the ethnocentric nationalism. He did not react this way when a white person shot dozens of people in Las Vegas. He did not come and say, well, we have to do an immediate policy change. We need to give this guy the death penalty.
Okay, so Matt, I'm curious. Maybe it's me. The guy in Vegas, he was dead. How could Trump come out and demand a death penalty for a dead man?
Yeah, that is a good point. I was just trying to follow, see what's he saying. It doesn't make any sense. But it's hard to give a death penalty to someone who's dead. But hey, he's a leftist, because they're familiar with death because half their brain is dead.
Well, his argument that he was making was that somehow Trump was not being after the incident in New York. In New York, we had a guy who was, was Arab descent, and now we have a guy who is in Vegas, and Vegas, Trump was demanding death penalty for the guy in New York, and so that's what the context was with this. It's like the guy in New York was still alive when they caught him. Or sorry, not the guy in New York. The guy in Texas was still alive when they caught him. And the guy in New York and the guy in Vegas was dead. It's like the guy was trying to make a case that in New York you have someone that's not white. Here you got someone that's white, and Trump's only asking for death penalty for, the non-white guy. And
It's just ridiculous that, the left tries to spin everything. I'm reminded actually of the book 1984, which I've been reading through periodically. But there's actually something that's really interesting in there. The main character's job is to write propaganda. And even if Big Brother had been saying something a year earlier, but they had changed their policy, then they would write the new stuff, which contradicted their policy from a year ago, and the people would just believe it, and it was okay. And the way it's written is really good. And remember, an atheist wrote this, but it reminds me of the leftist media, the twisting, and also the lack of critical thought that exists within within the people who watch them. We're not taught how to think in school, how to be objective, and how to learn. So the liberal propaganda, Gestapo style propaganda of the media, works on a populace that doesn't think, doesn't care to think. So it's bad. I don't trust the media at all.
Well, I like what one person said. If you taught critical thinking in schools, in the government schools, you couldn't also teach evolution. Both.
And you couldn't. Because if you were to really do that, evolution would have some serious problems if you really started teaching critical thinking and apply it to sciences. In fact, last night at the temple, Mormon temple, last night was the last night, but I had a discussion for a half hour with a girl who's an atheist and an evolutionist. And I started asking her questions. This is no joke. She was talking about how evolution's true. And we started talking about errors, logic errors. She didn't even understand the idea of what logic really was. And I'm not making this up. When I said, well, that's not logically correct, she goes, well, what do you mean? I said, well, blah, 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 cited a logical problem. And she had no clue what that meant. And I said, understand that what we're talking about here is this error. It's a logic error. She stared at me. I said, are you familiar with the laws of logic? And she says, no, what are those? And I said, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. You ever heard of that? Well, I think so. I mean, anyway, it was like that. And this is our populace. They generally don't think very well, don't think very critically. So no wonder the left propaganda machine works,
So, when a person, like in that case with the abortion clinic, the media is very quick to start trying to assume that the person is doing what they're doing because of an anti-abortion stance.
Right.
We didn't see any of this this past week with arguments of an anti-Christian stance coming from someone whose Facebook is supposedly covered with atheism. They're trying to say that it's all about his family, which doesn't make as much sense, being that I don't think his ex-in-laws were at the church. I don't think his ex-wife attends the church.
Yeah.
So, I mean, first off, let me ask you a couple questions with the shooting. One, what were your thoughts? What have you heard from the media on it? And then two, from a Christian apologetics view, as an apologist yourself, how should we as Christians both be ready to give an answer for why these things happen, and then should we expect to see more things like this, and how should we defend against it?
Yes, we're going to see more of it because, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about this lately, the unbelievers, you can actually watch them walk around in the darkness as they talk on the radio, as they are on TV, as they make these pronouncements, and their solutions are nothing more than them bumping into various areas of darkness and trying to solve a problem they can't see. What they don't understand is that laws are meant to govern the hand, but Christianity is meant to govern the heart. When the Lord God is in your heart, you don't take a gun and go and mass kill people. But when there is no moral right or wrong, and if you can get away with something, then you get away with something, that is far more a danger to society than what the leftists would say Christianity proposes when it says homosexuality is a sin. Doesn't mean we hate them. Doesn't mean we want to hurt them. It just means it's a sin. We don't approve of it. But the leftist media will take something like that, and then in their darkness, they will try and just skewer and crucify anybody who would shed light on their sin. And they do this not only in that topic, but in a multitude of topics. And so what happens is they're shooting in the dark, so to speak, on this issue of gun control. And they're trying to find ways to stop the problem. But they don't realize the problem isn't simply how many laws we need. The problem is that they are supporting the idea of getting rid of God in our hearts. And they're promoting further darkness in the hearts and the minds of others. And in so doing, more problems occur, and then they look for more solutions, which are derived out of their dark hearts and their dark minds. And so the problem perpetuates. They can't see it because they don't have the light of Christ upon them. This is the problem that's happening in society right now. And I'll sit back and I'll watch it. I'll watch them say more gun laws are necessary while they say there is no God, there is no moral consequence, there is no absolute right and wrong, there is no obligation by the Lord who's watching you to do what is right to others. No, we don't have that. We have, let's just pass more laws. Now there's an interesting verse. Let me see if I can remember it. Maybe it's, let's see. I'll find it, but it says the law is for the ungodly. And let's see if I can find that. I'll find it. But anyway, it's in one of the epistles. The law is for the ungodly. And that's the thing, is that this is why we have more and more laws, because there's more and more ungodliness. And we've got to think. People don't want to think. They don't want to deal with these issues. And the stupidity of the media and the godlessness that's there. Here it is. It's 1 Timothy 1:9. I'll start at verse 8. But we know that the law is good if one uses it lawfully, realizing the fact that law is not made for a righteous person, but for those who are lawless and rebellious, for the ungodly and sinners, for the unholy and profane, for those who kill their fathers or mothers, or murderers and immoral men and homosexuals and kidnappers and liars and perjurers, and whatever else is contrary to sound teaching. So the Bible, and this is 1 Timothy 1:8-10, talks about what the nature of the law is for. It are good laws and they're bad. There are which, well, we're into that. But what it's talking about here in the context, what I'm talking about here is the thing that the law itself, the more laws we have, is because of the rise of ungodliness. That's why you have laws, because things are going bad. As they get worse, you have to have more laws. And the short-sighted leftists who don't have the true understanding of where morality rests and that the heart controls the hand, what they want is less truth that governs the heart and more laws to restrict the hand. And this is their short-sightedness. This is their problem. At any rate, it's just some comments what I've been thinking about recently.
And, one of the things that I had, I guess, thought about and pointed out is that as Christians, you've been documenting this on your website, is Christianity in America is starting to come under persecution.
Absolutely.
It's coming under persecution by those who claim the flag of intolerance.
Right.
Yeah. So as Christians, as yourself, an apologist, how do we answer when something like this happens in a church? And then how do we answer when people ask us or challenge us or try to say that, like Christianity deserves this, as I saw on one atheist blog, that it's deserved?
Well, that's what the atheists say. Why is it deserved? And I'd love to have an atheist on my radio show. We could discuss that and just dismantle him. But how are we to respond? We're to respond by praying for our country and praying that the leftists would become regenerate so that the light would shine upon their hearts so they would see the heart as the issue, not the hand, and not laws. So this is what needs to happen. And on a practical level, carry a gun. And yeah, I've said it before and I'll say it again. If everybody's carrying a gun, everybody's equal. And in fact, in church today, the pastor, he talked about this, and he said, folks, I want you to know that we have security and they're trained and they watch stuff. And he talked about it a little bit. And he said, and we live in Idaho. And he said, so without asking, he worded it very nicely. He said, without asking, I don't want anybody to show their hands who's carrying a weapon, but how many of you know of someone who carries a weapon? That's how he worded it, and half the hands in the place went up. Half the hands, and it was really interesting because it was clear what was meant, and who's going to come into a church like that and start shooting? There's certainly going to be people who do it, but it's going to be met quickly and answered quickly. And then the reduction of violence. So here's the thing, reducing people's freedoms doesn't make crime go away. In Australia, when they confiscated the weapons, I remember reading an article, within 2 years, crime had gone up 200%. And there's so many quotes I've heard and read over the years from bad guys who, for example, they'll say, you can't send me to the death. One of the reasons they would do their crimes as bad as they did, take the risks they did, is because there was no death penalty. I've read articles where they have said that. If you know that someone has a gun and knows how to use it in the house you want to go in and rob, and they're there, are you going to go in there? No, the bad guys are going to want to go into the homes where there's no weapons, or there's a high restriction upon the use of it at every degree. The unbelievers don't care. They want to go in. And so what the leftists are trying to do, the socialist, leftist, communist types, what they want to do is remove our ability to protect ourselves. And then they say that it's in the name of goodness and progress that it's done. That's propaganda. That's what's happening.
Yeah, and I think I loved what my wife pointed out. There was a church in New York this week that has a new sign outside their door.
Mm-hmm.
Their sign outside their door says, "This is not a gun-free zone."
There you go.
I mean, you think about it. Remember the guy in Colorado that shot people in the movie theater?
Yeah, and he told why he did it.
He went 9 miles further to a specific theater. Why? Because it was the only one of there were 3 theaters before it, but they didn't have the sign like this one that said, "No guns allowed."
Right. Yep.
I mean, if it wasn't for one law-abiding citizen with a weapon that knew how to use it, there could have been more than 27 deaths.
Oh yeah. Right. Took them out. And that's what needed to be done. Unfortunately, I don't advocate using violence. In fact, I was almost attacked twice Friday night out at the Mormon Temple. People are prone to violence, and if you have an equal, let's just say you have an equal level of response, then they're far less likely to try and hurt you.
Yeah, I mean, I was out in Boise recently, and as you know, one of the things I love about coming out to Boise is that I get 2 things immediately exiting the airport. I get a handshake and a weapon. And I carry the.
I'm not the one who gives them to you, but that's okay.
No, you are not. You don't share your weapons. You just. You like your weapons too much. You hold on to them too tightly.
As a mutual friend of ours said when I was telling about how I almost got jumped by 2 guys Friday night, I was alone in the dark out in front of the temple, at that point, and another guy was a couple hundred feet away, so I was a bit functionally alone. I was telling our friend about this, and he said, "I don't have any problem. I'm fine, but my friend Mr. Glock would have a problem with that." And I got a kick out of what he was saying. But it's ridiculous. In fact, Anik pointed out to me that I don't know if you know that what I was doing when I had my selfie stick and my phone, and I would do 1 or 2 hour video on Facebook, and somebody on the Facebook thing said she sent me I think she got the wrong picture, but at any rate, because I couldn't find it, but he said that he wished. And I saw the clip. Sorry, I saw the thing. She wanted her to send me the file, but anyway, I saw what he said. He said there needs to be more shootings every Sunday, like there was in Texas.
Yeah, it's interesting because I saw on an atheist blog afterwards that because one of the people that survived that shooting had made the statement, "I wish I didn't go to church this week," or "I wish I missed church this week," something like that, and the atheist responded, "Good, maybe we should do more." And I'm paraphrasing now because I don't remember the exact wording, but it was like, maybe we should have more of this to have, fewer people go to church.
Wow.
Could you picture reversing that? Could you picture what these people would say if you were to reverse that and say something like that about any of the liberal type issues? I mean, the argument they make is they claim to have tolerance on their side.
Right.
They redefine what tolerance is. They define tolerance, right?
Excuse me.
Tolerance is defined as me accepting your differences. And so it's on I choose. I choose to be tolerant of your differences. They demand tolerance, which says you have to be accepting of me.
Right.
That's the exact opposite of tolerance, because they're not being tolerant of your views. They're demanding you accept their views.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm serious. It reminds me more and more of the book. What am I reading? I just mentioned it. Brave New World. Oh, 1984.
No, 1984.
Yeah, I think there's three. There's three books that I always think of in a group: 1984, Brave New World, and Fahrenheit 451, which everybody should read. All three of those. They're dystopian sci-fi novels. Fahrenheit 451 is the temperature that paper burns, and so I talk about burning books, rewriting history. That's what's done also in 1984, and with a governmental control and propaganda machine well underway, and you're not allowed to disagree with the intelligentsia, with those who are in control. Otherwise, you disappear. And in Brave New World, people are conditioned for certain jobs, and the barbarians are the ones who have babies the natural way. In Brave New World, the churches, with the cross, are cut off. The top part is they have a T instead of a cross, and then they talk about the invention of the Model T as being that time and that distance of history where true progress was made. So they would convert churches into these things. It's been so long, like 40 years since I read that, but I remember that, and also remember one of the main characters. He had a Bible, and if he was caught with it, he could be. I think he could be executed just for having that. But these are the ideas. This is not so far off. There's a lot of things that are like that. We have, as Christians, we got to fight. And I think pastors need to preach to thin the church out, and I think we need to stop namby-pamby stuff. And I think I was talking to somebody recently, and I said, "You know what the job of the pastor is?" And they said, "Preach the gospel." I said, "No, that's not it. To equip the Christians for the work of ministry." And as we've talked about this before, if I were to start a church, I think I'd probably get 50 people the first Sunday to show up, 40 the next, 30 the next, and it would go on and on until we'd have 10 or less people who might show up. And those would be the ones who aren't afraid to do. Not that I'd be preaching like that every single Sunday, get out and go out and door to door. But I mean, they know that I'm the kind of preacher who says, look, the Great Commission is something we're supposed to do, not just learn about. And I would urge people to do that. That makes people uncomfortable. So there's just, anyway, I get a lot of comments you can make about things like that, but nevertheless, these are some of the issues we're going to deal with just kind of shooting all over the place.
1984, and there's a great quote. I mean, it's throughout the book, but talks about the relationship between the past, the present, and the future. I forget the exact wording because it's been a while since I read it, but it's something about the nature of he who controls controls the future.
That's right. It was in the book. I told you about that. It was in the book.
In 1984. And so that's why they're rewriting the past.
Right. If you control the present, then you can control the past. And what that means is if you're in charge of what's happening now, then you can rewrite history. And if you can rewrite history, then you can control the future. Brilliant statement.
I remember reading that book as a kid, well, I guess as teenagers, 1984 was when I read it. The thing that amazed me, I read that and was like, this is crazy. I mean, no one would actually fall for these things. And for years, I held that, that can't be. But lately, we can't even tell the difference between a boy and a girl.
Yeah.
I mean, we now have states that are giving a third option on the driver's license.
Yeah, it's insanity. In fact, I read an article recently about, I think this is it. I hope I got it right. I read so much, I get things mixed up sometimes when I don't write it all down for documentation, research purposes. But nevertheless, I read an article while I was going to sleep that in, I think it's New York subways, they're getting rid of ladies and gentlemen as a pronouncement, announcing, but persons and passengers, stuff like that.
Well, they would have to, because in New York, if you use the wrong pronoun, you could be fined $150,000.
What?
Yes. If you use a pronoun that someone does not accept, they can charge you and you get fined. Now, if you think about it, I'm curious who this pays, because as far as I know, the state gets the money. Hence, they're going to come up with rules like this because, I mean, there's going to be plenty of people that are just going to complain, file complaints, and the state's just going to, it's a new tax system.
Wow.
I mean, to me, that's insanity.
Oh, yeah. And we Christians had better get off our lazy diaperinian rears and start something. And I've said this before. I think what we could do is we have a national whatever where we have $5 a month, is being put in for legal costs, and everybody with the last name that starts with an A goes to their capital doorsteps with signs saying, we want our rights back or something. Have to get lawyers involved and they'll write the right thing, and they stand out there, get thousands of people out there. Then the next day, it's the people whose names start with the letter B, and you work through the alphabet in every state of the union. As I think this kind of thing would carry some weight, and then people who get arrested, there'd be no reason to arrest anybody. You just stand there with a sign, hold on, But if something happens, the reason that $5 a month is given is so that the lawyers can go in there and defend the people who might have been arrested for whatever reason, because the leftists they trump up charges, and the left doesn't like stuff, and so you have these wackos that are lying about people. So what you got to do. I think it's a good idea. I think it's something we should be doing. And you have a national website that we do this for, and we organize it and get it going. I like the idea myself.
Well, you did come up with it yourself.
Yeah, I did. But who's going to do it? I mean, how many Christians would actually do something like that? I would.
Yeah.
If somebody would, someone had the finances and the knowledge and the ability to put this together in different states, you'd need people who are working this. I don't know this stuff, but man, can you imagine if that happened? The news media would have to start covering it. Why are you doing this? And then that's when you get, you need to talk to so-and-so, the official so-and-so representative of this group. And then that's how it has to be done. And you do it periodically, start demanding our rights back.
Well, I think part of the problem with that, actually, Matt, is when I was involved with Occupy Wall Street, and yes, I was, not as someone who was supporting it, but they invited me into their meetings, which is, by the way, one of the reasons I know it was not something that happened on a Thursday Facebook thread, because I was invited to the first meeting like 3 months prior. So it was a planned thing. And one of the interesting things is they were targeting to do things where there's large numbers of homeless people or people on welfare and things like that. Why? Because they had the time during the day to be out there doing this stuff, because they were getting meals. People may not realize this. There were catered lunches and dinners. There was food coming out that was being provided. There's all this stuff so people just saw it as, hey, why not just show up? Why not do this?
Right.
For someone like you or me or most believers, we're actually working. We're paying for all those people that are, on the government dole, because we're generating those taxes, right? That's the thing that's hard, is we don't have the large number of out-of-work people to go and be doing this all day, every day. And I think that's why your idea is kind of interesting, because you'd be doing it one every 26 days, not
right.
But there'd always be people out doing it.
Or once a year, one day a year where you go out, and you don't have to be out there all day. Because think about it, you could have your last name on this day, it starts with an A, Anderson. Well, if your first name starts with the letter A, then you go out at this time, 8 o'clock from 8 to 9, whatever. You just break it up during a day. I mean, we got enough people out there. It would generate income for the city with parking. Businesses would prosper for food, and our rights would be hopefully promoted. I think it's a great idea. I do.
Yeah, I think that the thing that you end up seeing, take an example how it is that we see the rise of the LGBTQRST community. They used friends in Hollywood to make something that was previously seen as not acceptable, by putting it on a screen, make it seem acceptable.
Right.
Just pushing it out there, putting it in our faces over and over. Having gay pride parades, and this is the thing I find interesting. You have the gay pride parades that must go on, but in New York they end up having the more and more resistance to the Catholic Church that used to have a parade. And
really?
Yeah, and I think they may have actually stopped it. It was back a few years ago, there was a big debate on whether they can continue, because it was Roman Catholic. And it's like, wait a minute, you allow parades for everything else.
Well, see, the Bill of Rights has been used against us. The government shall not, have a church,
establish any religion.
Right, establish religion, but it's not establishing. That thing has been turned into the opposite of what it really was there. It was so that the government would not establish a national religious system that everybody was obligated to attend. That's all. And it's supposed to promote. In fact, the 1700s and the 1800s, the Congress was promoting religious freedom and the printing of Bibles and things like this all over the place. They knew what the Constitution meant, but these wacko leftist media people, socialist, communist jerks, they are in control of the present, which is why they're altering the past so that they can control the future. And that is the case. It's happening. We got to stand up. I'm telling you, we have got to stand up. And if we don't do it, then the Christians are going to lose their freedom, and we're going to have to flee to the hills or something like it. But it's the truth. You're telling people this, but they don't listen. They don't care.
I know that our atheistic viewers hate when I bring this up, Matt, and you know probably what I'll say, but being someone who's raised Jewish, raised to study the Holocaust, there is a progression, and
absolutely,
that progression is continuing. It's just not with Jewish people this time; it's with Christians.
That's right.
The Christians are doing the same thing that the Jewish people did back in World War II. They sat quietly by. They tried to keep their head in their sand. They looked the other way. They figured this could never happen. I mean, one of the things I always thought was so amazing in time and time again, no matter what book or documentary I would see on the Holocaust, the one repetitive thing was that all of the survivors said, we didn't think this could ever happen. We were too civilized.
Right.
And that's why it happened, because they denied that it could happen. And many people deny that it could happen again. But why? Why would we deny that these things can happen again when they happen time and time and time again in history?
That's right. You know what they say? He who doesn't study history is doomed to repeat it.
Which is why I think all politicians should be historians and not lawyers.
And Christians.
Yeah. Well, according to Bernie Sanders, we shouldn't have any Christians that are in office, because that immediately disqualifies them.
No, it's Christians who should be in office, and it's the Christians who are going to be afraid that they're not glorifying God by honoring the responsibility of integrity and honesty that God has required of them before the people and the environment as well. So, you know, the principles of biblical theology are don't spend more than you have, and to take care of the weak and the needy, and to govern people and to guard them. And Christianity does not teach killing homosexuals, it does not teach oppressing them. It teaches treating everybody equally, but it says those things are sin and they should not have special rights. In fact, I just read an article in Canada. A Christian couple was denied adopting a child because of their view on homosexuality. They thought it was a sin. And just for that alone, they said, "Oh, you can't adopt a child because you believe homosexuality is a sin." I mean, the intolerance of the left. If we do not push back, then they will continue to push. You know the story how it works. High school, there's these boys, and they pick on people. One time, one of these guys gets tired of it, and he punches the bad guy or the big guy back. Maybe he loses, maybe he wins after that, isn't the point. Now everybody knows that guy will fight back. They think twice about approaching him. And it's the same kind of thing that we have to have here as Christians. And we need to fight back. And I don't mean fight back physically. That's not what I'm saying. We need to fight back according to the laws. And we need to fight back according to the rights that we have as Christians. We need to fight back. We need to go out there and demand our rights that have been given to us by the shed blood of the founding fathers of our country. And this idea of just turning the cheek, and Christians going into a church where the music's comfortable and everything's so stinking easy, and then they're just taught just be loving and kind and don't worry about anything else. That just perpetuates laziness. I would be preaching, be kind, be gentle. And there's another verse in the Bible. Where does it say, wherever possible, be at peace with all men? So maybe somebody could find that.
I want to say that might be Philippians 1, because it sounds similar to that.
Possible, right? And that's what it is that we're to be at peace with everybody as much as possible. But if they're going to, if they come into my home, somebody comes in my home and they're attacking my wife, I will do whatever is necessary to stop that person or those persons. Whatever is necessary, I will do what I have to do. And if I'm at church and a bad guy comes in and starts shooting, I won't be the first one to return fire, because there's a lot of people here in Idaho. We'll return fire. We'll meet it, but we don't want it. Nobody wants it. But we're to be at peace. But when they come in and they want to destroy you, we have the right of self-defense. This is why Jesus said in Luke 22:36, do you have a sword? No, we have 2 cloaks. Sell one of your cloaks and buy a sword. Jesus said this. And I'm not advocating violence, folks. I just want to make people to know. I am not advocating it. In fact, Friday night, as an example, one guy came at me and his girlfriend stopped him. And I was backing away when he did this. And I said, that's right. Don't approach. Just leave me alone. I'm backing up, like that. And he quit. And then a half hour later, another guy, he was literally 8 inches from my face, yelling at me, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? And what had been saying, as I was out there just saying Mormonism's not Christian, has a false God, and just saying stuff. This guy comes out with his wife and his kid, who's like 6'5", And this guy was like about my height and about another 50 pounds heavier than me. And his wife and I were discussing something just very politely. She's really nice. And he just started getting angry as I was answering her and saying Mormonism's not true. This guy started pursuing me. He didn't hit me, but I know he wanted me to hit him first, which is why he was doing what he was doing. And I had my hand on a sign and my other hand on a coffee thing, and just setting the scenario up to tell you what I did. But I was backing up from the guy saying, please leave me alone. Please do not approach me. You're aggressive. And he got really close to me, and I thought about taking him out with one shot because he was so close. I mean, a throat punch, you know. I mean, my hand was right there. I could just get him in the throat and he'll drop. But I thought about that, and I thought if I need to, I can do this. But I didn't want to. And then I thought about putting my stuff down and getting, take Krav Maga, just getting in my defensive stance because he was that aggressive. But even then, I decided not to do anything, and I just kept retreating and saying, "You are pursuing me." And I started saying it louder and louder. And it took 30 seconds to 45 seconds before he finally backed off as I continued to back down. So I'm not saying look for a fight, and do that. If he'd have struck me, I would have just still back up. But if he'd come at me, then it's on. And if my wife had been out there and he, went after her, it'd have been on. But, there's situations when we're going to defend ourselves and defend others. But this is what happened. I just went through this 2 nights ago. And so I want people to know I'm not advocating violence, not at all. And the man in me wanted it to fight, but the Christian in me refused. And so I did not.
You're advocating self-defense.
Yeah, I'm only advocating self-defense.
And the verse you were talking about is Romans 12:18. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all men.
There you go. I love that. I want to memorize that address now. And that's what we need to have.
Yeah. I mean, there's a big difference between violence and self-defense. It's right. With what you're saying. I mean, I was on the Grappling with Theology podcast with Frank Mullis, and he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and so he talks theology, talks jiu-jitsu. And the question came in is, you have a background in martial arts, I have a background in martial arts, have I ever used it on the streets? And I've never used martial arts to defend myself, ever. I've used my voice, talked down like you just did, talk yourself out of it.
Right.
But I have used my martial arts to defend others. And, like one of them being, one of our hecklers, a guy who hates the Christians, but he got sucker punched, and I just jumped in the middle to defend him. And, it was a case of defense of someone else. Like you said, if your wife was there, it would have been on.
It'd been different, yeah. If he'd have gone after her, I would have just gone. If he was yelling, I would have just got in between them. That's it. And if he would put his hands on me, then we'll see.
Come to think of it, if someone was dumb enough to go after your wife, I think she would destroy that person first. You might just have what's ever left.
Yeah, the reason, I know. Well, my wife has health issues.
Of what your wife leaves of the guy.
Well. Yeah, that my wife has problems, and she's brittle. She has brittle bones and stuff. If a guy would push her down, it could literally break bones on her.
Yeah. So hey, let's. I know that Dr. Anthony Silvestro came in. I asked him to come in to ask you some questions that and I mentioned to you beforehand, at least one of them, because I was like, these are some difficult but more philosophical questions, and kind of tough, but more maybe up your alley than mine. So I want to welcome Dr. Anthony Silvestro. For folks who don't know, he's with Creation Revival, and his book that he's got out is On the Origin of Kinds, that you can pick up at ontheoriginofkinds.com. So Dr. Silvestro, welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. Matt, how you doing tonight?
All right, man. How you doing, big dog?
I'm good. Good to talk to you again.
Now, for the record, because in case, our boss, Tim Hurd, sees this.
Our boss? Okay.
Well, Bible Thumping Wingnut, we all report to him. And the reason I'm saying that, Matt, is because as we look at Dr. Silvestro there, he's got those earbuds and the mic there. When Tim came out and gave him some nice podcasting equipment, and he's not using it, you're going to be in big trouble with the boss. I'm just saying.
This was a whole lot easier to hook up, just to plug it in the back of the computer versus still figuring out how to use that. So, well, having said all that, so Matt, I've got a couple of questions for you. And the first one, I know these are doozies. So, obviously, I love the book of Genesis and the creation account and teaching correctly about a young earth and trying to correct some of the poor teachings out there about an old earth and whatnot. The first question I have is this. When we look at the garden, we talk about death occurring, promised in Genesis 2. What I believe to be both a spiritual and physical death that's promised there. We see in Genesis 3 an immediate spiritual death as their eyes are open, realize they're naked, they're ashamed, Adam and Eve, and that the promise of future physical death. From dust you are, to dust you shall return, later on in Genesis 3. So the question I have is this. We understand that all men are born with sinful flesh because of Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Where exactly do we get spiritual death from? Meaning this.
Adam.
Well, no. I agree with that. So does it come at conception? Does it come the moment we're born, or does it come at the moment of the first sin of a human being?
Well, say your question again. The first part of it.
Yes.
Where does our sin nature come from?
No. When does spiritual death actually occur?
Well, define spiritual death now.
Oh, that's a good question. I guess I didn't think that far. Yeah, well, I guess if we go back to the garden, we have to look at and understand the idea that they had the knowledge of good and evil. When their eyes were open, they realized their nakedness. Right. They were ashamed of. Right. We understand at the end of Genesis 2, they're spiritually dead right there. Right.
Right.
So when is it that everybody born now after Adam is actually spiritually dead?
Then, when Adam died.
When Adam died.
Yep. When he did it, we died with him. That's called federal headship. In Adam, all die. 1 Corinthians 15:22.
Mm-hmm. And I think I would agree with you on that. And I think Psalm 51:5.
Of course you should.
Yeah, well, I do. The issue is that I've read so many commentaries on this that there seems to be no consensus in terms of that answer. That's why when I asked Andrew that yesterday, I wanted to ask you that too.
Well, I mean, a lot of it just depends on how you define a few terms and nuances and shades of meaning in various things. But, clearly the Bible says in Adam all die. So what we understand there is he represented us, so we died in him. But what does that death mean? Is it a spiritual death? Well, what does spiritual death mean? That's why we have all these different views. If we can define our terms very specifically, we'll have less deviation within Christians about that answer. And so if we're to define spiritual death as it is in Genesis 2:15, separation from God, and let's say separation from God with the necessary follow-up of physical death, because they started dying right there. They were guilty, and so they hid themselves. But since he was the federal head, then he represented us on the cross, in the garden. And so when he died, we died with him. So when does spiritual death occur for every individual? When Adam sinned. That's one way to see it. Another way is, well, what about the actual individual because he wasn't alive then? Now we're talking about a different context. And I would say at that point, at conception. Like a lot of people say, when does life begin? What would you say? When does life begin? Does it begin at conception?
Absolutely.
I would say, no, it doesn't.
No?
No, not at all. It continues. See, life, the egg and the sperm are already alive. Life doesn't begin at conception, it continues at conception. And God is the one who's the author of life, and it continues down from Adam and Eve down through all people. Conception is only the place where that particular individual is actualized, becomes a reality. But the life from Adam continues on. Biologically continues on. So it doesn't begin at conception, it continues at conception. So if we're to look at it that way, when an individual becomes an individual at conception, does he or she possess the sinful nature at that point? Yes, we are by nature children of wrath, Ephesians 2:3. Have they committed a sin? I wouldn't say they've committed a sin, not at the moment of conception. They've not committed any sin, they're just conceived. So we wouldn't say that spiritual death is a result of spiritual of sinful action at that point. We'd say that in the doctrine of federal headship, representation, and original sin, that they are under the headship of Adam and are guilty. And then people would say, well, no, you can't say that because they can only be held guilty for their own sins. Well, in Adam all die. 1 Corinthians 15:22. They're going to deal with that, and what that means. And then there's discussions of what that means, believe it or not, what the level is. It just gets complicated. So the question is not an easy one to answer because there are different shades of meaning on different aspects of the question. And then the answer is going to have shades of meaning as well. So you're just a troublemaker.
Okay, so let me tweak what you're saying though for a second, Matt. And I think you and I agree on this one is, when does the spirit begin, right? Because,
we don't know.
Yeah. But I think you take the position that it's at conception, not at birth, right? I mean, it's not something you can be dogmatic on.
I'm not dogmatic, but I would think, if we're going to say the human spirit, because I'm a different human being than you are, so when did you begin? When did I begin? Well, the actuality of in time, I would say at conception. And so therefore, since we have spirit, I would say that that's when my particular human spirit was, I'll just say, formed.
So and the reason I think that becomes an interesting one is, if you hold to the position as we do, it's very interesting when you look at it the way you described as the life continuing, only because we would say that I would at least say that God doesn't create a spirit and put that spirit into a person at birth or conception, but that it's something that God created in the procreation.
That's one of the views.
And that also would explain the sin nature, like you're saying. So from Adam, it passes on from Adam further down,
right,
through the man, through Adam to child.
Yeah, and some say, well, what would happen if you cloned a woman, a female egg, female egg? Would it have a soul because it didn't come from Adam?
Actually, that was the very thing that I was talking with Dr. Silvestro about, because I actually did a paper on that in an ethics class, seminary, and said, well, if you clone a human being, that doesn't come through procreation, could that be an easy body for a demon to possess without any resistance?
It's one of the things I've wondered too.
And I propose that maybe that would be the Antichrist, is someone who's a cloned body.
Yeah, and a Democrat and a leftist socialist. Yeah,
you just had to go that way.
Yeah, I did. Well, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I don't have, in my opinion, the Republicans that I've seen and how things are going, and I mean by represented by the party, what I see on TV, those people. I see the Republicans now were what the Democrats were back in the 60s, and it's just getting worse.
But you were a big Trump supporter, right? Didn't you hold signs out saying vote for? Oh no, wait, no.
I didn't vote for Trump. I voted for the Constitutionalist Party. I think Anthony
had a follow up.
Yeah. All right, so I got one more question, Matt. This will be another interesting one. Obviously, Christ died on the cross physically. When did the spiritual death occur? I've seen some commentaries that say that there was the spiritual death happened at the moment he died physically, and there's others that say that he died at the moment that darkness came over the land. I know. That's why I'm throwing it out there at you.
They are obligated to define what spiritual death means then. Because think about this. If they mean spiritual death is separation from God, which we could say is spiritual death, that can't happen with Christ, because it would deal with the issue of the ontological Trinity. And so Jesus, in his divine nature, here this gets complicated, so let me explain this. There's a doctrine called the communication of the properties. So Jesus has two distinct natures, the divine and the human. The attributes of both natures are ascribed to the person. Jesus is one person with two natures. So Jesus as a person said, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, human attributes. But he also said as a person, Father, glorify me with the glory I had with you before the foundation of the world. So the attributes of both the divine attributes and the human attributes are ascribed to the single person. Incidentally, this means that Jesus can never have sinned because God's holy and the attribution. And okay, so this is one of the things. It's called the communication of the properties, or the Latin phrase is communicatio idiomatum, which is a lot more fun to say than communication of the properties. So in the communicatio idiomatum, we have this as a feature here. Now, if we're going to say that there's a spiritual death and a separation, then we cannot have it be that the divine nature was separated from God. That's a logical, biblical impossibility. So when we say spiritual death, now we have a problem. What is spiritual death defined as being? And if we go back to Genesis 2:17, which is really the first place of spiritual death that we can really kind of get to, the day that you eat this, you will die. Well, what does that mean? In Isaiah 59:2, the soul that sins shall die. And Ezekiel 18:4, I believe that your soul, soul that sin shall die. That's Ezekiel 18:4, and your sin has caused a separation between you and your God. That's Isaiah 59:2, I believe. So the issue is there's a separation and breaking the fellowship. All right, now the divine nature cannot sin and cannot be separated from the rest of the members of the Trinity. So it could not be that the spiritual death was that the divine person, the divine nature, was separated from God. That's impossible. Can't happen. Anybody would say that would be heresy. All right. So then what does it mean if the issue of sin? Because sin is a legal problem, 1 John 3:4. Sin is breaking the law of God. Our sins were imputed to Christ, 1 Peter 2:24, Colossians 2:14. That there was a legal transfer of debt. Go to other stuff like that. I won't do it now. That was Jesus bore our sin. He actually had our debt, sin debt. Well, he became sin, 2 Corinthians 5:17. 5:21. 2 Corinthians 5:21. He became sin. Now, when he became sin, see, here's another question that relates to this. When was our sin imputed to him on the cross? When he was, as soon as he's put up there? Right before he died? When? And that's a question. Who has an answer for that one?
Right.
So, because if let's just say it was the last hour. And I'm not saying it is, but just to talk, let's just say he was imputed with our sin the last hour. So he was up there for 6 hours. Does that mean 5 hours he was in fellowship with God the Father, and the last hour he wasn't? We can't answer these questions because we don't know when that imputation occurred, but we know that it did occur. But the scriptures don't say anything about it. It's a good thing the scriptures don't, because there'd be a whole host of theological issues along with concomitant heresies associated with that. So Jesus could not have in the divine sense. What about the human sense? Since he died in the physical sense. And so when I say to people, what we see in the person of Christ is we don't see divinity. If we were to go back and see Jesus, we would not see divinity. We would see humanity. Just as you look at me in the camera, I look at you in the camera, we see humanity. See my eyes, hear my voice, my gesticulations, and things like that. So what you're seeing is the physical manifestation of the human essence. The human essence is a different thing altogether. What color is the human essence? That's a non sequitur. How much does the human essence weigh? It's a non sequitur. You cut a man's arms and legs off. Is he less human? No. Humanity is not merely the biological. So the biological essence is simply simply a vehicle through which the human essence is manifested. So when we perceive Christ and his divine essence, we are seeing the divine through the manifestation of the human. We would see the human being exercise divine qualities by walking on water, by speaking to a storm and saying, be still, just commanding people to be risen from the dead. And also, we can count on him saying, your sins are forgiven, as a manifestation of the divine essence, because he's the one who has the authority to do that. All right. So we have this issue here as well. So what does that mean when we're looking at the imputation of our sin upon Christ when it becomes sin? Well, in the human sense, in the body, we can see that. But is it the physical body that was imputed? or is the Spirit of Christ is imputed? Now we get into dithelitism. Not Nestorianism, but dithelitism. Nestorianism, I'm just explaining how difficult all this stuff is. Yeah. Dithelitism is that each person or each nature has to have a will. Theleo is the word for will, to have a will. And so there was a divine will and a human will that's manifested and expressed in a single person. That's a proper doctrine called dithelitism. The heresy is called monothelitism, that there's only one will in there. All right, Nestorianism is the error that the body of Christ had two distinct persons, which is dithelitism, but it's an error of dithelitism with two persons. That's Nestorianism. Well, that's not right. The true doctrine is the hypostatic union. One person, two wills operating as one will in the person. That's orthodoxy. So you can see all this further complicates all of this. So when did he die on the cross? Well, he died on the cross when his heart stopped, right? Not necessarily, because we know that people can still be alive when their heart stops. They can be alive for minutes afterwards. When the breathing stopped, no, you can still be alive. If you're to hold your breath, you're still alive. So this whole thing becomes extremely difficult to really work through. And I spent this time showing the nuances to say, ultimately, people should not say, this is when it happened. They should say, it's a very difficult question. We can't really do this accurately. Here's a theory. Here's another theory. And you know what? They have strengths and weaknesses, but we can't know for sure. That's why I spent that time to show this is this kind of a thing deals with the very nature of the incarnation, the hypostatic union, dithelitism, imputation, what happens when, what's the definition of spiritual death, how could it happen, the ontological trinity, etc. And there's too many variables to be able to give a competent, accurate, precise answer. Troublemaker.
Yeah, thanks. That's why all the commentary is all across the board on this. So
that's right.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, but those are good questions. Those are thinking questions, and then I just say to people, I don't know. Yeah. God hasn't told me in the Bible, so I don't know.
But I knew those are questions you kind of like. So
yeah, they're good questions, though.
But let me ask this: take that a step further, because it's some interesting things as you were saying. I mean, first off, I'm impressed that you still remember all these things that you've studied from years ago. But you were mentioning going through this. Okay, this is orthodox. This is where you go into heresy. I didn't hear what you said.
You said you were impressed. I remembered all this stuff from all these details, and I said, "That's right, Frank." It's a joke. I can't even get your name right. I remember this. Okay, that's all.
So, I mean, can you explain? There are many heresies, and sometimes some of these things that can go into a heresy could just be subtle changes. I mean, maybe what would be good for folks is to discuss why is precision important when it comes to things like this, and how easy it is to fall into heresy.
Oh, I can give you an illustration. Excuse me. We're in the salt flats or a flat desert someplace, and there's an oasis that's 40 miles there. And it's going to take us 2 days to walk, and we could do it in 2 days. We don't have any water. And if we don't breathe through your mouth, you got to breathe through your nose when you're in the desert. That way you have less dehydration. And you walk at night as much as you possibly can. And you get there. If you're 1/100th of a degree off from the beginning, you're dead. You better make sure that you're on the right track the whole time. Because the sooner you make a mistake, the further down the road you go, the worse your error is. And that's the kind of a thing that this is it. So precision is necessary, especially when we deal with the issue of the nature of Christ, incarnation, atonement, things like that. That's why I study those things, because that's precise. So rapture, well, you can be off on that and still be saved. You can miss it. We went the wrong direction. We're 180 degrees in the wrong direction. We're still going to be okay. But there's certain things you can't mess with, and this is why precision is so necessary. So if you were to say that, for example, that Jesus lost his divine nature at the cross, or let's do it this way. Let's say that as oneness Pentecostal theology erringly says that God is not a trinity of persons, but one person in 3 manifestations or 3 forms or 3 whatever, however they want, in particular one wants to say it. When Jesus is in the garden, who's he praying to? Because if there's a full incarnation of the second person of the Trinity, then we have a full incarnation and we have the full hypostatic union. And therefore we have the proper doctrine by which the atonement can occur on behalf of God, on behalf of man. But if there's only one person, how do you have a full incarnation of one person in oneness theology in the person of Christ? Because the question I ask at this point is, well, who's left to run the universe if there's a full incarnation? Because you got to remember, the Word had to have his diapers changed. The Word had to suckle at the breast of Mary. The Word had to get circumcised. The Word had to grow in wisdom and stature. Or the person, I should say, not the Word. I should make this is why. See, there's a good example. I just screwed up, and I was not precise. I should have said the person, not the Word, because the Word doesn't do that. The divine second person of the Trinity. There's a good example. I didn't catch myself why precision is necessary. So it's the Word. See, did it again. It's the person who grew in these areas, and the attributes, of the communicatio idiomatum comes into play here. And then why was the cooperation, the reduction, the kenosis out of Philippians 2:5-11. At any rate, so we get back to oneness. So I ask him, well, who was Jesus praying to? Well, he's praying to himself. But wait a minute. If he is himself, the Word or God in himself, why is he praying to the Father in heaven? And now you can start seeing a question start coming up, and they don't make sense. So this is why precision is necessary, particularly in the doctrine of the Trinity and the hypostatic union and the communicatio idiomatum. I say that actually what people need to know is there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 doctrines they need to know very well. This is one is the doctrine of the Trinity, then the economic Trinity, the ontological Trinity, the hypostatic union, and the communicatio idiomatum. And if you know those well, then I'll repeat them if anybody wants to write them down. But if you know those well, then you'll do very well in answering questions like this. So the doctrine of the Trinity, one God in 3 distinct, simultaneous, co-eternal persons, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And each person is not the same person as the other. The ontological Trinity, which is each of the persons of the Trinity share the same divine essence, the same divine nature. The economic Trinity, which is that each of the persons has a different function. The Father elected, sent the Son became incarnate, not the Father became incarnate, not the Holy Spirit became incarnate, only the Son bore our sin, the Father did not, etc. The Holy Spirit convicts the world, not the Son who does that, the Holy Spirit. So you see there's a difference of function in the economic Trinity. So we have the Trinity, ontological Trinity, and the economic Trinity. You also have what's called the hypostatic union. In the single person of Jesus are 2 distinct natures, the divine nature and the human nature. That's called the hypostatic union. And then in relationship to that, those 2 natures in the person, we have the doctrine called the communicatio idiomatum, or the communication of the properties, where the attributes of both natures are ascribed to the single person, where the single person says, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, Father, glorify me with the glory I had with you before the foundation of the world. That's incidentally John 17:5. So with that, and also let me throw something else out that really is helpful. Galatians 4:4 and Philippians 2:5-8. Those verses are also very useful at this point when you're answering questions about the person and work of Christ. And I'm just kind of going on something here. I'll just continue and go through this. People are taking notes, hopefully. Because Galatians 4:4 says he's made for a little while, he's made under the law. Now this is important, because if he's made under the law, why would he have to pray to the Father? Because under the law, he had someone he had to call his God, his Lord. That's why, under the law. And so under the law, you get, people will say, well, in John 14:28, Jesus says the Father is greater than I. That's not because of the ontological issue, the ontological Trinity. It's not because of that, or the hypostatic union. It's not that answers this, but because of his position is lowering himself, taking the form of a bondservant, being made in the likeness of men, Philippians 2:5-8, the kenosis. And we can talk about the good and bad kenotic theories. But so Galatians 4:4 is important. He was made under the law, and Philippians 2:5-8, he emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant, humbled himself to the point of death. And also Hebrews 2:9, he was made for a little while lower than the angels. If you've got all these down, you can answer 90 to 95% of the questions about Jesus. And why he did this, why he went there, what about that, what about this? If you got that, you can answer almost all of them at that point. Sorry, I just...
And for folks, that's probably, you want to probably rewind this, listen to this again, because I think that was an entire semester of Christology in one segment.
Well, if you want, I can go into Eutychianism, monophysitism, and some other things, but and then the aseity of God, talk about him, and any rate. So
that was very quick and slick of you.
Sounds like you got another chapter of your book, Andrew.
No, I don't use those big terminologies. You know, I like
these are the tools that allow precision. In fact, here's one of the things. I'm going to turn my fan off over here. People will say to me, "Oh, I don't believe in the Trinity," and I'll say, "Well, do you know what the Trinity is?" And you know, this is the desire to be more precise. Well, it's three gods. I say, well, no, it's not. Well, yes, it is. You have, and they'll explain, and I'll say, well, no, it's not. And I don't get mad at them. I say, no, that's not what it is. We talk, and stuff like that. And so you ask definitions. You ask what people mean by things. So get their definitions, what they think something means, so that you can understand better what's going on with them, and then teach biblical theology through it. Of course, I don't do it fast like I just did. I do it more slowly,
Well, that's okay, because this is recorded and people can rewind and listen to it again.
Right.
And
That's
again.
right, they could. Remember when I first taught you all this, Andrew? I just speak like this. Now listen carefully.
Well, see, I was going to say people listen to on podcast and they can put it down to half speed. See, I listen to at triple speed, because usually there's not
this stuff.
Content. It's just
yeah, you know this stuff. So, that reminds me. I was talking to a guy yesterday, day before, Friday, and he's not theologically trained. He's just a student, and there's some reasons that he was studying to deal with some heresies in his area, his geographical area at a certain church. This guy, man, I love talking to him. He was whipping the stuff out. Oh, the hypostatic union, but the dithelitism problem because of things like that. And it cannot be libertarianism, it has to be compatibilism because of this. But I was like, dude, I love you. You are awesome. It was great. They'll talk in shorthand, all those terms, and put them together well. I really enjoyed it. I just had to say that it was a lot of fun.
Oh, well, actually, I think you called me or I called you just after you got off the phone with that guy, and you were still excited. You were like, "Oh, I got to tell you about this guy."
Yeah, it was great. Like somebody who's not trained and stuff like that. He actually said a few things I didn't know. I'm like, what? What's that? And the only one I remember, he said two things, but they're just a couple phrases. It was a term, and had to do with the settled view was one of the things he talked about. What's the settled view? I didn't know that. And it's basically Calvinism's view of predestination election. Basically. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. Just little things, but it was really fun to talk like that.
So, Anthony, any more questions you have?
I got a question for Anthony then.
Uh-oh.
Now, I gave you guys the tools you need for this one. I know you know the answer to this. If you know the answer, don't blurt this out. Okay, just hold on. Let's see how Anthony does, because he can quiz me on evolution stuff, and I'll, then it's, the tables are turned. But okay, so here's a set of questions. Which nature of Christ died on the cross?
Well, human nature has to be what died.
Good, that's correct. All right. Now, if only the human nature died on the cross, then how is the sacrifice of divine value?
Okay. Well, you have the fact that it was human bloodshed. You needed human bloodshed to pay for the penalty of sin. But then it was divine value because he is also God, and that would allow it to be paid for an infinite amount of sins for eternity.
Yeah, I'd give you a C plus on that one.
Okay.
And because you got it right, but I would want you to articulate it better, and I'd just give it back to you. And I'd go to the paper and go, word it better. But you're right. You got it right. Now we just got to polish it. So, what's the communicatio idiomatum? That the attributes of both natures are ascribed to a single person. The word person is very critical in biblical theology. Person. You're a person, I'm a person. Attributes of personhood, for example, are you can say you and yours and me and mine, and you have wills and love and can hate. And God is three persons, and we're each one person. All right. So the person died on the cross, and hence the person had divine value because of the communicatio idiomatum. That's all. But you're on the right track. The human blood was necessary. That's out of Leviticus 17:11, 17:14, 9, Hebrews 9:22. The shedding of blood, need that for the cleansing of sin. You go to 1 John 1:9. But human blood isn't sufficient. Mere human blood isn't sufficient because the person had to die on the cross, and the person had to have divine value, and so the death of Christ was the sacrifice and stuff. And so actually, Christadelphians asked me this question once. They thought they had me on this one. And as soon as they said, "So which nature died on the cross?" I knew where they were going, and I was like, "Here it comes! Bring it on! Bring it on!" And these Christadelphians, they're like Jehovah's Witnesses, except smarter. And they asked me this question, and I gave them the answer, and they did not know what to do after that. It was fun. At any rate, good. You did a good job. You got it. I would turn the paper back in a seminary class and say, word it better for the A. You know, the communicatio idiomatum. Blah blah blah.
Thank you for that. That's great. Yeah.
I like what Joe says. Joe was saying. So this is now Anthony Answers. So back to Slick Answers and Anthony.
Silvestro Answers.
How about Silvestro Answers? So how about you quiz him on evolution?
Oh yeah, we could talk about epigenetics. I think that would be interesting sometime.
Yeah. Well, you know, we should do a show on epigenetics. I know you and I talked about that a couple of years ago to do that. I think that's a good idea. We should do that one of these days.
Look, I don't think there's anyone in here that has questions, so why don't we talk about it right now?
Yeah.
So
that's why I'm good with epigenetics,
folks, and then explain how it basically destroys evolution.
Well, let me try it because I know he can correct me now. All right, because I don't study this like he does. So epigenetics is basically, I'm taking a risk here. I'm hoping I get it right, and then he can say, "Oh, you thought you okay."
Yeah, this is where he's going to say, I'm going to return
C+.
the paper and say, you're right, but it needs a little bit more explanation for the A.
Yeah, that'll be fair. All right. So epigenetics is basically the phenomena that they know about where environmental pressures activate and deactivate certain genes.
That's essentially that's the definition. That's right.
Yep. That's what it is. And why is that a problem? Because if you have a strand, so to speak, I'll just represent, it's not exactly how it works, but let's just say a gene that's this long. And inside of this gene in different places are information structures need to be activated or deactivated. Actually, it should be the genes themselves. But at any rate, the things that have to be activated and deactivated, certain genes have to be activated and deactivated. You have a DNA, I don't even know how it works now. It's a protein, what is it? A protein molecule with individual genes, whatever. How is it that if it's cold outside, it activates the gene in reproduction? That's the problem. That is the basic kind of thing. That's way simplistic. It's not completely accurate, but it's that kind of a thing because evolution is talking about mutational problems that allow for new information structures to form, which then are selected or deselected in evolutionary stuff. So how is it that this environmental pressure activates and deactivates this information to become used in an offspring? It doesn't make any sense, and it provides another means of adaptation besides mutation. And so it's a direct challenge to the neo-Darwinian theory of evolution. How'd I do?
Well, I think okay. So this is where we have to take it a step further. And I know there's people that are going to disagree with this, but they won't be able to prove otherwise. it's something I clearly lay out in the book and is clearly laid out in science. This is something I've asked a numerous amount of PhDs. What is the basis of evolution? And there will be people that throw all kinds of terminologies out at you, right? And they'll say natural selection, adaptation, gene duplication, and genetic drift. And I mean, their terminology goes on and on and on. And yet everything has to come back to mutations, everything. And for evolution to happen, molecules to man evolution, macroevolution to happen, you not only have to have mutations, but you have to have mutations that increase functional genetic information over time.
In relationship to the environment.
Well, that's a whole other story. Yeah, I mean, you just have to have it happen in the first place. Now, the environment brings up different challenges. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the reality is you have to have information that can get added in. Is that mechanism even present to begin with? And the answer is no. We've never demonstrated a mutation that increases functional genetic information. We have tons of mutations that have been discovered that have been shown to decrease information. That has nothing to do about beneficial or non-beneficial mutations. It just has to talk about information into the genome. There's never been one demonstrated to increase information. That's the biggest problem. Now, the evolutionary biologists will challenge us creationists and say, well, I don't understand. You want us to believe that you had one pair of felines on the ark that somehow turned into all the cats we see today in the cat kind. And this is where I think epigenetics really is amazing, because again, 4,300 years ago or so is when the ark landed, and we have all of these different cats that would have come from the same pair. How did this happen so quickly? Well, this is where epigenetics comes into play. We as creationists don't believe that you had an amoeba that turned into everything. We believe that God created everything. He had all the genetic mutation, not mutations, I'm sorry, all the genes needed in the beginning pair, and things speciated out from there. So everything was there already. And so the question is that how quickly can those genes be selected over time? Not that new information is being put in, but how can they be selected? And this is where the role of epigenetics has been absolutely amazing. So we've shown with epigenetics how the environment not only plays a role in helping select those genes, but it can do it really, really quickly over time. Where I think it becomes a big problem for evolutionists is this. Evolutionists, first of all, have to look at a DNA strand that is twisted and rotated, right? So we see that double helix spiral in the DNA strands. The problem is that when we look at epigenetics, is it just the gene next to one another that is causing other genes to be switched on and off? No, it's not. We have this double helix that is twisted into this like ballish type of thing where you have a three-dimensional structure in the genome. And it just so happens that up along this chain here, which seems to have nothing to do with this part of the chain way down here, when it's all balled up together, this gene is what turns on this gene here, or turns it off, or selects here. We also understand that not only do we have, when you look at regulator genes and whatnot, sometimes there are double and triple layers of regulation going on in this structure that is three-dimensional. I think we've only seen the tip of the iceberg in epigenetics, but as time goes on, I think it's going to continue to show the creationist position to be true. So that's just a little bit in a nutshell. And again, I would love to do an entire show on this and really lay all of this out from beginning to end for people, especially if they haven't had a chance to read my book or read some of the good creationist stuff out there and have a good background on the understanding of this.
Yeah, that reminds me, I was talking to a guy once who was studying genetics, and he was a Christian, or I think he was or wasn't, I'm trying to remember, but he was over here at the house, and he was telling me some stuff. And we had his whiteboard up on the wall, and I said, look, I don't know all that much, but just do the best you can. He spent 40 minutes going through details like what you were saying, but he was drawing stuff out, and he was getting into it, and my jaw was dropping. The complexity is just so humongous. It was just inconceivable. And he then turned to me at one point and was just like, "Can you believe this?" And then he says, "And they believe," and he goes in the class, he says, "and they believe it happened by chance. It just came together. It's incredible." And he said, you remember when the light came on, he was in class when he realized the super complexity. It's not going to happen by chance. It can't.
That's right. Well, and I think what's so amazing in understanding epigenetics and therefore understanding this three-dimensional structure DNA, they want us to believe that you somehow had an adaptation that added one little piece at a time as time goes on. Think of building blocks as time goes on. And yet, you can't just have these building blocks because this gene could be affecting so many other portions of the genome somewhere else in the three-dimensional structure. How does that type of complexity get built in? Let alone just a single strand of DNA and the complexity it has on its own. Yeah, it's unfathomable.
I use the woodpecker as an example of stuff that somebody can easily grasp, easily visualize. A lot of people don't know the woodpecker's tongue goes down its mouth, down by its vertebra, in the back of its head. There's a groove in the skull. It goes down up through that groove, down between the eyes, down a nostril, and out the mouth. And that's not even counting the eye sockets and the cushioning has to go, and the vertebra modification and all that. We'll just talk about the tongue alone. And I ask them, how does that evolve? I can see mom and pop, woodpecker, and she says to the hubby, "Now, don't worry. I know this tongue's born in the back of his skull, but don't worry. He'll be able to get the grubs. He'll survive." It's ludicrous. And I use that one as a very simplistic model. But when I've used that one, for example, and show that things can't just be one thing at a time building upon another. Everything has to be in place for it to work. It's the same principles on a large scale. They can see that one. That one people get. They go, "Are you kidding?" That's right. How does evolution explain it? I actually tried to read it. I was reading an article once where they tried to explain this. It was entertaining. You could see the hoops they were jumping through to try and make things fit.
Yeah. Part of my creation training, this is really interesting, is you learn about reading fuzzy words. And so when you read through a scientific article, look at how many words are there that says "we believe" or "it could have happened," or different terminologies to show they don't actually know. This is all built on fairy tale. They have all these words that can go in so many different directions. Next time you see an article, pick one up, or when we do this show one of these days, I'll have some articles prepared and I'll just read a paragraph of it and let everyone just listen to all these words that are in there that are in descript. It's amazing.
Oh yeah, I was talking to this girl last night at the temple. She's a profound evolutionist, and she said, "Science is fact." And I said, "No, science is a philosophy." And she actually laughed. And I said, "Let me show you." I said, "Science," and define what science is first. You observe, you hypothesize, you develop a methodology to test your hypothesis. This is one of the loose definitions. And then by modifying the tests, you obtain, hopefully, predictability, which develops a theory. That's the basic scientific method. And I said, but it has to presuppose the universality, the laws of logic, and presuppose the uniformity of nature. These are philosophical assumptions that cannot be proven by the scientific method. They're assumed. I said, so the heart of philosophy, the heart of science is a philosophical assumption about our world and about our rationality, which they can't explain using science, but we can as Christians. Yeah. And this girl never heard that before.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. You touched on something earlier about different parts all having to be present at the same time. One of the things I love to use and show to people is you look at a Boeing 747 jet, which is made up of 1 million different pieces none of them are flying, and yet you need every one of these parts put together for one of these Boeings to fly. we inherently understand a Boeing 747 jet was designed. Every detail of it was not designed and put together. And we as creationists allow evolutionists to get away with something, and we allow them to get away with this idea of a simple cell. And there's two problems with this. One is they can't explain how life came from non-life, the problem of abiogenesis. I mean, they have no explanation for it. That's why evolutionists will only start with a cell, or what they call the simple cell. And here's the second problem. What exactly is a simple cell? Even the simplest of cells are made up of millions of pieces that were all somehow had to be designed, created. They couldn't live on their own. They were all somehow in the same primordial soup at the exact same time, and somehow came together into a living cell that can not only live but reproduce.
Well, can I interrupt you and just show in the camera? You know about this book, Signature of the Cell?
Mm-hmm.
To illustrate, this is how thick it is. Just talking about that issue of the cell. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
So I'm reading some of the comments on the side here. So Thaddeus Trill is talking about trees being alive or not alive, or he's talking about them being alive. The problem with the definitions you have here on the side is that these are all from an evolutionary scientist perspective in terms of how you define living. And the thing is, as Christians, if you're a Christian, Thaddeus, I don't know who you are. If you're a Christian, your presuppositions have to start with God. They have to start with the Bible. Well, no, he's not. So that's where it comes from. Thank you, Vincent.
He would be a spiritualist, is how he defines himself.
Okay. And so, see, the problem is that when we have to start with truth, we have to start with the Word of God, and we see in there that life was, the idea of nephesh is not given, so to speak, to plants. Plants don't actually die, they wither. And so when we understand the idea in Genesis how death didn't enter into the world, both spiritual and physical death, until original sin, that Adam and Eve were not to eat any animals. They were only to eat plants. The same thing that all the animals were supposed to eat were only plants and the fruit from them. That they weren't actually killing anything by eating that fruit or eating those plants.
That's why definitions are always important.
Mm-hmm.
In a biological sense, yeah, a plant dies in the sense of how they describe what death is. It's the cessation of cellular activity. Well, then by that definition, yes, but not by the biblical one, correct?
Yep.
Always definitions. I have a thing, I read it in a book. I think I read it. It was the first thing you do is define. Then the second thing you do is use those definitions in statements. And then the third thing you do is use logic and scripture to validate or invalidate the statements.
Yeah, it's good.
I think it's wise. Okay, so now what?
So Matt, have we convinced you yet that this Earth's only about 6,000 years old, or have you gotten through the book yet? That should be my question.
I'm prepping for some debates and reading some stuff. So what I'd like to say now, you get a kick out of this. When I lack belief in how old the Earth is. So that's what I'm going to be saying now. I decided that a few weeks ago, that when atheists say, how old is the Earth? I lack belief. And the reason I'm doing that is it's a strategy, and they can quote me on it, is because I don't want the atheists who want to argue all of this. I'm just going to say I have no problem with it being 6,000 years old. Doesn't bother me at all. Okay? If you want to say it's millions, there's arguments for that, even from a biblical perspective. I'll just say it. I'm just not going to commit. Actually, there's speed of light issues and some ramifications and some other stuff, but and yeah, ratio anyway. But I'll just say I just lack belief, and that way I want to get to the real issues. That's what I just lack belief, and so how is an atheist going to argue with that?
Yeah, well, they probably can't, but so we actually address the issue of the speed of light in the book, and for the listeners today, I'll throw a quick answer out there. This is what's interesting. The evolutionists, Big Bang theorists want to tag us creationists and say, you must believe that the speed of light, that light had to have traveled faster than the speed of light, right? And the reality is that the evolutionists have the exact same problem. In their model, the Big Bang, there's not been enough time for light to have traveled to allow the universe to be as universal in temperature as it is, 1 in 10 to the -5th Kelvin. It's absolutely incredible. So the reality is they have the exact same problem called the horizon problem, and we need to start tagging them on that too. We don't have the answer. We have some ideas. Dr. Jason Lyle has some fantastic ideas on how to answer this so-called light speed or light travel problem.
You just reminded me of something. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but I'm not. Anyway, I like documentaries. I was watching a show on the universe, and they're mapping galaxies, and this is cool how they do this, and they're just enjoying watching it. And so towards the end of the show, this documentary, they said, here's our present map of the universe from what they can extrapolate the best they can. And it was, imagine like a shoebox, a shoebox standing up on its end, and then lengthen it a little bit so it's like two shoeboxes together, side by side, standing up. So that's the depth and the proportions of this grid that they used. And so you can see all these white galaxies, these little stars. Well, they weren't stars, or galaxies, look like stars. And they were rotating this thing through, a three-dimensional thing on TV. And I'm like, oh, that looks so awesome. And I'm not joking. What I saw shook me up, because as it rotated through, you saw a man's or human figure. It was, imagine, like, I don't know how to describe it, but imagine, a human being with his arms out and his legs out, like Galileo picture is, that man, the circle. And then, but imagine that those are all rocks that have been formed, and then shake the foundation a little bit, and it gets blurry, but you can still see the form. That's what I saw.
Wow.
I went back, I looked at it again. I went, how come no one's making a comment about this? I mean, it wasn't my imagination, It was like, look at that. There's 2 arms and 2 legs and a head. And then it disappeared as they're rotating through. You know what? I would not be surprised if the universe created by God was created, and the galaxies are put in that form of a man, and we're in the center of it. I wouldn't be surprised.
I think maybe you've watched too many alien movies and sci-fi.
No, just not enough alien movies.
CMI's Alien Intrusion movie is coming out in January. You'll probably love that one, Matt.
Oh, Matt would love
Alien Intrusion. What's
Alien
this about?
Intrusion. Well, Gary Bates has a fascination with all the alien stories out there. Now he's out there to disprove the alien stories. So he has a documentary coming out in January that is going to speak to this.
Yeah, I saw it already, and Matt, you would love it. I think he loves UFOs and aliens more than you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been studying this stuff for years. I don't tell people I do, but I've been studying it, and I've actually seen. I don't talk about that very often, but I've seen one. And, it wasn't like a spaceship thing. It was something in the skies, a light that moved, and that could not have been anything that was man-made. The way it moved, it just light off of the distance. It moved up, then it moved down. I thought it was a plane, and then it was way off of the distance, and then it went like this, right over our heads. I remember it. So anyway, whatever.
Well, Matt, admit it. You've been abducted by aliens.
At least 4 or 5 times this year.
Wait, if we're going to talk about movies, we really should put a plug in for Eric Hoven's movie coming out.
That's right. Yeah.
What movie is that?
And I unfortunately, so here's the thing. So there's a movie coming out Monday, and there's going to be tomorrow. Repeat showing on Thursday, and it is called Genesis: Paradise Lost. It is basically Genesis 1 in 3D. Now, Dr. Sylvester, you've seen it, so I'm going to let you speak to it. But it's coming out just 2 days. I unfortunately, we were trying to rent a theater, and we had problems getting that through. And so now the only theater that's playing it in 3D by me is sold out. So I'm going to have to wait. We're going to have to try to figure something out to see it in 3D. But you saw it down at the premiere.
I did. So I was invited down to the premiere down in Pensacola, where Eric's at. And what an amazing movie. So first of all, this movie's been in production for 7 years, and the movie is three-dimensional graphics showing each day of creation. It's fantastic. And then interspersed in between those days are a number of creation scientists and theologians who understand the biblical account of Genesis, and they're out there teaching through Genesis, teaching against evolution, while 3D graphics that are just spectacular going on the screen behind you. So the movie is about an hour and 25 minutes from what I remember. That's absolutely fantastic. So, so for me, I'm excited. I mean, this is going to draw a lot of kids to come out and see these amazing graphics and actually get the correct biblical worldview.
There you go.
Yeah, but Robert is not agreeing with you.
I would expect that.
But I'll give another plug. And Matt, this is probably too far for you, but you got to come out to DC. Do you know about the Museum of the Bible?
I've heard about it.
Yeah, so it's opening up. I guess the week before. Actually, this week it opens. I'm going to be out. I can't make it to the opening because I'm going to be speaking at Cedarville University, which I'm totally excited about because, Matt, my daughter attends there. She's graduating this semester, graduating early. So the fact that I got to speak before she graduated is cool. I'm excited about that. So I go out this week. I'll be speaking on Thursday, and so I couldn't make it to the opening. But we're going to go. We're going to be in DC for Thanksgiving, so we're going to go check it out, and maybe I'll be able to give a report of how cool or not that is. But it's supposed to be pretty good.
Well, good.
We'll have to get Matt. What we'll do is, Matt, we'll get you to come through. We'll take like video cameras and have you do a tour through. That could be fun.
Yeah.
We could do a paid guided tour. We can get some people to come and pay admission to Matt to teach them as they walk through the Bible, right?
There you go.
Bible Museum.
That'd be fun. That's right. And this is how covenantal works. Notice the heresy section where dispensationalism is, and notice that the cessationists look at their foreheads. See how slanted they are? Yeah, it would be great.
Hey, listen. Now, this would be a fun discussion, but and Matt, you should probably give a listen to it. Is the latest Grappling with Theology podcast that dropped yesterday or today? I forget when. Here was the interesting thing. We were talking about the regulative and the normative principles in worship. And the discussion we ended up getting into is my view of hermeneutics. And I like to say that I practice the regulative principle when it comes to hermeneutics. Now, for folks that don't know, the regulative principle says that we only do what the Bible says to do, and nothing else is allowed in worship.
That's why I'm a covenantalist.
Yeah, and that's more Reformed people would hold to that. And a more strict view, as Matt, a regular who used to be in here is Rocco P. used to come in, and his church really holds to it. They only sing from the Psalms because that's what's in the Bible, and so they only sing from Psalms. And so we were talking about regulative principle. Normative principle is where you can do whatever the Bible says you cannot do. In other words, if the Bible doesn't say you can't do it, then you're open to it. And so the interesting thing is that when it comes to worship, covenantalists typically are more lean on the side of regulatory principle. We only do what the Bible says you can do. The interesting thing with that is when it comes to hermeneutics, really dispensationalists are more following the regulative principle because we take it more literal unless the Bible says not to, and covenantal would take it a little bit more.
That's the Lutheran view.
Yeah, the freedom there.
Yeah, I prefer the Lutheran over the Reformed regular principle, actually.
See, if we apply that to infant baptism, you'd have to say the regulatory principle eliminates infant baptism because it's just not there.
You know how I'm going to forego this this lame attempt to bait me. But, yeah, so It's a long way for you to go for an insult like that. And
actually, it was a pretty good podcast that we did, discussion, I should say, of, it is interesting how you look at those two principles and different camps that hold to those principles in one areas versus the other, and almost not consider. It's like, well, we hold to it in worship, but just in worship,
Okay, so I want to run something by you guys. This is a complete change of topics since we're almost ending here, but I want to run something by you guys, see what you think. Just something really fast. You guys open for it?
Yeah, we got about 8 minutes before the council begins.
All right. Now, to demonstrate pre-trib rapture doesn't work. What do you guys think of this? I'm going to go to John 6. I'll put the text in the side.
Okay.
And I'm still going to expand it, but okay, here we go. So this is John 6, 39 and 40. All right. In the text, where Jesus says he will raise up his people on the last day. Okay. That's the whole point of that. He'll raise them up on the last day. All right. Now, I'm going to go to 1 Thessalonians 4, 16 through chapter 5, verse 2, because the chapter breaks is unfortunate. No big deal. I don't think I need 5 in there at all. Okay, but so there it is in the text as well. So here's the thing. In John 6, Jesus says he's going to raise people up on the last day. The last day. That has to be the last day of the normal things here on earth before new heavens and new earth are made. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the last day. Last day is last day, okay? Now, notice what it says in 1 Thessalonians. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. The dead in Christ are those who are believers who died before the return of Christ. Now, that's the resurrection on the last day. The dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together, meet him in the clouds. That's the rapture. The rapture happens after the resurrection on the last day. What do you think? Quick and slick.
Yeah, I'm not sure. First off, which
last day?
Well, no, which resurrection, right? Because you have
which resurrection?
You would have, if the rapture, right? But there's two resurrections that would be mentioned.
Okay. So when it says the dead in Christ shall rise first, what is that?
Yeah, and I know you've talked about this, and it's one where from the way you explain it, sounds good. But it's also one that I haven't studied enough to answer. But
now so I'm still working through this, but it says they'll rise first. First before what? First before the people are raptured. As you could say that.
So,
but Jesus only mentions one resurrection. I will raise them up on the last day.
Yeah, but
there's only one resurrection.
Revelation mentions a second.
Mentions what?
Right.
That's the thing about what is it, the resurrection or revelation, the second, because some people think, and the problem with Revelation is being so symbolic, I don't go to it to prove doctrine. I just don't. I respond to people who made statements about Revelation, but some people say the first resurrection is being born again, and the second resurrection is your physical resurrection, because you were dead in your sins, and now you have been born again. It really means from above, and so some say that the first resurrection is your spiritual resurrection from death, and the second resurrection is your physical resurrection from the death, which is perfectly consistent with Scripture. Now, is that what it is? Don't know.
Yeah,
but you see,
and
the
revelation
thing doesn't prove anything.
That would be a consistent position, and so
my position would be consistent. Yes.
Well, no, it'd be consistent to say, that you'd have a spiritual resurrection separate from the physical resurrection, because I do know dispensationalists that hold to the view that the first resurrection would be, the church and people spiritually. But at that final day, that final where Christ at the end, and the dispensational view would be after 1,000-year kingdom, and at that end of that, before that final great white throne judgment, then there's a resurrection of all the bodies. And so
now I've got a question for you then.
Now some, and I'll give you a different view that some dispensationalists have, which I think it might be a harder one to hold to, is some will say the first resurrection is the church and the second is Israel.
Yeah, that gets a bit too much. Yeah,
I think that's pushing the separation of Israel and the church a little too much for me.
Yeah, a little too much. That's why when people go to Revelation to refute something that's clearly taught in other areas, it's going to sound bad, but Revelation has, in my opinion, a second level. It's not as good as the clear teachings as far as proving things go. I'm not knocking its inspiration, but it's just so symbolic. That it's difficult.
Better to go to Revelation than a Westminster Confession of Faith or some.
I would absolutely.
Creating
absolutely, you go.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah. And so, notice what Jesus says in Matthew 24:29, but immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened. Blah blah blah. Verse 30: the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. The tribes will mourn, and they'll see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. Verse 31, he'll send forth his angels with a great trumpet. And notice what it says in Thessalonians. It says the voice of the archangel and with the trumpet of God.
Yeah.
So it says here in 31 of Matthew 24, he'll send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and he'll gather his elect. Now, the gathering of the elect with the trumpet is after the tribulation.
But that also assumes that there's only one trumpet call.
No, there's 7, but this is the last one, and excuse me, I'm tipping my hand too quickly here. This has a great trumpet in Matthew 24:31, and with the trumpet of God in 1 Thessalonians 4. But there's other studies that show how many trumpets, and there's a concomitance and an arrangement of the last one, but that's another study. But anyway, I just think it's interesting. But I think when I was reading John 6, he goes, raise up the last day. Well, last day? What is the last day? What is the last day?
Yeah, and there's a lot of, there's I think distinction that many will make between the last day and the last days, because Paul said we're in the last days.
But that's from Joel. That's quoted by Peter, or actually Luke, in Acts 2:17 and 18. But this says the last day, and he specifically says the last day, the last day. There can only be one, the last day, that is associated with the return of Christ, the rapture, and all that kind of stuff. I think this really quickly demonstrates that pre-trib rapture can't work. This is one of them, one of the arguments I've got. But at any rate,
and the passage that I end up going to often would be Daniel with the 70-week prophecy, and the reason being is when you look at that, what do you do with it? There's only one way, I think, to get out of a premillennial view from Daniel, and that is to say that the whole thing is figurative, the whole 70 weeks. Most people don't do that.
I don't think it's figurative. I think the week is a figurative representation of a literal day, a literal period of time.
Period.
Yeah, but we could talk about that some other time too. Yeah.
Yeah, and in my view, it's like when you take that first 69 weeks literally as a literal time period.
Yeah, I think so.
But then you take that last week and say that's somehow figurative. There's nothing, I think, in the text that says that suddenly has changed to a figurative, which is what a lot of amillennials will end up doing. I've heard a few that just say the whole thing's figurative. At least would be more consistent, but I don't think it's accurate.
You have to look at it some other times too. But at any rate, just something to throw out at you guys before you
let's let folks know. Matt, you going to come over to the council?
My kid's over, and I'm thinking about going to see a movie in an hour and a half, so I'm going to spend time with them.
Yeah.
Put the link in Skype, and then if I can, I'll come back.
Yeah, I think you may already have it. I think they sent it to you in. Let me see if you're in this.
Yeah, I already watched Blade Runner 2049. I liked it. Yeah.
Is that what you're going to see? Blade Runner?
No. I'm thinking about going to see the Thor movie. thinking about it. See, I go on Sunday nights after 10 o'clock. I'm like the only one in the theater. Yes.
You got the message. You got the message, Matt, on Facebook. So look in your Facebook Messenger. So the Council Google Plus follows this. That is a little bit more open. And so what we end up seeing with Council Google Plus is that it's a lot more free discussion, and you can join in there. So I encourage you guys to check that out. The way to find the Council Google Plus is, well, if you're watching on YouTube here on the Bible Thumping Wingnut, this broadcast will end, and another one will start live in just a few minutes, hosted by the Council Google Plus. And so that's how you get in there. Want to encourage you guys to continue to check out all the things at CARM, CARM.org. That's has many apologetics articles and information out there for you. You can check out strivingforeternity.org. We have some classes. You can basically get some free classes at a seminary type level of education without the tests and quizzes yet, but you can get those things for free. That's on our site, and you're going to find, well, at least 14 podcasts and a lot of blogs on BibleThumpingWingnut.com. So I encourage you guys to check that out as well. And before we close out, just going to play a quick commercial from our sponsor at Bible Thumping Wingnut.
Looking for that perfect track for your next evangelism outreach? Look no further. At TractPlanet.com, we have solid biblical tracts that are a breeze to hand out. They are beautifully designed and are the highest quality tracts available. With over 80 different designs in stock and literally hundreds more available by custom order, we're sure to have just the right one for you. You can get any of our items printed with your church or ministry information, or have us design a brand new tract just for you. We are committed to the solid biblical message of law to the proud and grace to the humble. Each tract is firm on the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the necessity of repentance and faith in salvation. Come check us out at TractPlanet.com and make sure you use coupon code BTWN at checkout for 10% off your entire order. That's TractPlanet.com, coupon code BTWN.